Welcome back to the show where Dana is her lovely, wonderful self and I can't see. The struggle is real, people.
Yeah.
The struggle.
Yeah. Oh my God. Sometimes we don't know exactly what our topic's going to be and then something that's going on with us. So Gwen is struggling with new contact lenses and is like, you can only see real well out of like one eye right now. Is that the issue?
Well, I mean, I've got some pretty good vision out of one eye, and the other, I mean, you know, for those of you out there, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you even want to know this, but I have a horrible vision. Like
I've never heard, you're in the tens.
I'm in the tens. 10? I'm a minus 10 and a half.
I didn't even know it went that
far. Oh, yeah. I don't even know what the level is for like being legally blind. I'm not sure, but I'll tell you.
I'm sure it's less than 10.
Okay, because when I don't have any correction, like if an apocalypse came, like a zombie apocalypse, I wouldn't know who would be a zombie and who not. Like I might run right into the arms of a zombie. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'd not be well. And so I'm playing around with, specialized contact lenses because I also have an unusually large cornea, as I've been told. Some millimeters greater than the standard DV, standard
like,
was trying
to wider or thicker?
Wider. Okay. And these contacts have to
really
cover.
Big irises, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I don't know. I can't change that. Like I can't change how big my corneas or my pupils are. Like I can't do that. It might explain why I am so darn visually sensitive to everything. But so these contacts are like, oh, they're floating and sailing and blah, 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 and on your eye. And ooh, it's so comfortable. Yeah, comfortable. I can't see.
I can't see. Yeah.
Dana, I cannot. And I'm like, I'm like totally discombobulated. I'm completely discombobulated by this change.
Yeah. So we were talking about this before we logged on, and this idea of sensory change. I'm like, it's so, whether it's getting used to new contacts, new glasses, sometimes if I get a new haircut, and it really does discombobulate you. Something like vision is so important. And even you were having trouble even getting them in because they're different than your other ones. And
you
just
use a plunger.
If I can't,
I have to use a plunger. Oh yeah.
If I can't get my earrings in on one or two times, the skin on my hole starts to blow up, and then I can't get it in, and then I'm like, I like want to throw something. But I think that the sensory change is such an important topic for us to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like, well, there's got to be some 20/20 visual followers out there, but it seems to me like everybody that I know that's neurodivergent in any way has glasses or eye issues. They seem to go together. I was born with a crossed eye. I've been wearing glasses since I was probably before I could walk, put drops in the eyes and that kind of stuff. And it's really sort of interesting because like I will go to when I had to have surgery on both eyes because I was starting to get cataracts and they were narrowing the angle of where your fluid in your eye drains out. So I was at risk for having a glaucomic emergency. And they take your lens out basically, which sounds really scary. And then they put another one in that actually has a correction. So I was always 4.5, something like that. I'm farsighted. And now these are just a wisp of a correction now. So I can actually see now without my glasses on where I never could. I'm farsighted. But I remember having this conversation. I was having these done around the time I was just coming out as autistic. And I was like, should I tell my doctor? Should I not tell my doctor? What should I do? And my eye doctor knows how sensitive I am to the slightest change of anything. I don't have binocular vision. So like when he would change the power in one eye, it would make my eye kind of cross. And then in low light conditions, it would make it worse. And I found a great doctor. And then of course he retired. I'm like, no. Yeah. And then this young whippersnapper came in and he's like, oh, we should change your prescription because this isn't what I'm testing. And they changed it and I had to go back to the other lenses. There's like this, it's almost like there's this tiny little path in the middle that you can like do. And then anything outside of that, a lot of times, a doctor will say, I'm sure your doctor's saying to you, give it time.
Yeah.
And I finally did tell my glaucoma guy, I actually told his nurse, I said, I should let you guys know that I've been diagnosed autistic, and I wasn't sure how they were going to react. And he was like, oh, no, that's all good information for us to have. And then when I told the doctor about it, the surgeon about it, who was awesome, by the way, but I said, so if I'm kind of a pain in the butt, and he said, you could never be a pain in the butt, which was, points for him. But I said, I'm going to notice things that no one else you've ever worked with in your entire career. I just want you to know now that's going to be me.
Yeah.
And it was sort of afterwards. I had one of the lenses, I had a little bit more inflammation in that eye that he couldn't figure out why it was staying that way for so long. And it's finally settled in. But I will notice the tiniest little nuance of change. And I think it's because we're so hypersensitive. We talked about a lot on this podcast about tags and clothing. And I was looking at pictures of the Met Gala from last night.
Oh, yeah.
How do these people do this? How do people wear something like that for a whole evening and not lose their bloody minds? All I was just thinking of a sensory nightmare or something like that, let alone something like an everyday
That's what we should have done. We should have pulled up Met Gala pictures and been like, on a scale of 0 to 10, how long? How many minutes could you stay in this? That's all it could be.
My skin was crawling even looking at the pictures of other people wearing it. I'm like, oh my God. Like when you watch the red carpet and stuff like that. But those kinds of things I think are important for people to think about, because I think that you almost have to be able to communicate those to professionals that are taking care of you or family or whatever. Like I wear orthotics, and I told my guy, I totally am going to notice everything. And I have found that now it's a frame for them where they don't just see you as, oh, just go away for 3 months and get used to this. They seem to have a little bit more tolerance for that. Like, oh, okay. And then I think for me too, I'm sort of taking responsibility for my body being the way it is. And then they want to work with you like, oh, okay. Versus you're like, oh, I noticed this change. And they're like, oh, it's nothing, don't worry. And then you feel dismissed. And then it starts this whole cycle of badness. But something like contacts and something as vital as being able to see, it's like your executive functioning just goes out the window, I would imagine, right? We say you're discombobulated, it affects everything.
Yeah, it's just taking up energy and bandwidth that I don't necessarily have, and it's bandwidth I don't want to give up for this. I've spent a lot of time in suction cup contact lenses, which have worked fine.
Like the soft ones, so they stay in through suction. Okay.
And my eyes are very, very dry, and they've gotten much, much worse to a painful degree as I've aged. And so, it's like, the change is necessary, and I get this. But Dana, what I love about, and of course, what happens, we go back to self-knowledge and self-awareness and how that is a cultivated skill, I'll say. Like that's not something that, just kind of typically happens. Right. But, the other part of advocacy, because you're talking about advocating in many ways, right, is that not only do you know this about yourself, but you accept it as okay.
Yeah.
And then you say something about it to someone else.
Yeah.
Like it seems like, I always feel like advocacy seems like such a simple thing, but it's actually not very easy to do because I think like as I've started to just, become more aware, and this is probably maybe an artifact of aging and being a psychologist, right? Like, more aware of myself and seeing myself kind of differently. But something that I've noticed is I don't want to speak up. Like I don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't want to make waves. I don't want to burden people. I don't want to be an inconvenience. And then in the meantime, I can't see out of my right eye. I can't see. Like I'm going to have to call them and be like,
oh my God.
Hey, like how long am I going to wait for? And actually, I kind of wish that in this process, before even signing up for this, that I would have been told, hey, the process to finding the right fit and lens for you could take months.
Yeah, because then you
You
have a
could
frame
have,
for
right,
it, right? Yeah,
right.
yep,
And
yep,
that for me, and we're taught this from a consent standpoint, right?
right,
Like,
yep.
okay, like let's talk about coming into therapy. Therapy isn't like daisies and roses all the time. I mean,
Mhm,
we
mhm,
do talk about things that can be difficult. You could
yep,
leave a session feeling exhausted and tired and maybe even a little bit dysregulated.
yeah.
Like it's to be able to say to people, like, you don't come into session and then we solve all your problems in 50 minutes and
Right.
then you leave regulated and all
Ding.
contained,
Yeah, yeah,
ding.
yeah,
One, because you're not a problem to be fixed or a disease to be cured. I mean,
yeah,
that's part of it, right? But I just kind of wish I had that consent, and I think, or that knowledge or that frame, right? So I could
mhm,
consent. I could make an informed decision about
right.
whether I wanted to go down this very, by the way, expensive
Oh,
journey
yeah.
of, this kind of lens. And so, am I hopeful that things are going to get better? I mean, at this point, it's my only
Yeah.
option.
Oh God. Yeah.
It's
But you
my
bring
only,
up
I
a
have
really
to believe
important point,
it.
and that is like how like I visualize like these layers of you talk about advocacy, but also layers of how far do I have to go out where something can contain the pain, the adjustment of that, and even if it's say this could take up to 3 months, then at least
Yeah.
versus I'm thinking of when I had my last thumb surgery, the third morning, I'm sure because of the swelling got was peaking, and I couldn't feel the tip of my thumb, and I'm like, I know this is not good because if it gets too tight, it's going to cut off the circulation, and I know some of it was the sensory piece of it. I couldn't tune it out. It was hurting. It was tingling. And I called them and they're like, oh, it's just swelling. It'll go away. I'm like, no, you don't understand. The tip of my thumb has no color in it. And I know. And I had to call back 3 times. And I had to finally, and I was doing what you did, which was maybe it's not that bad. Maybe it'll be okay.
Right.
I was
Diminish,
pacing,
diminish.
I was pacing around, getting more and more upset about it. And I'm like, I'm being ridiculous, stupid. Why am I doing this? And then finally, my wife was like, "Just go, just show up." And I was like, "Well, I can't do that." I called him again, and I said, "You guys either get me in and have someone look at this, or I'm just going to cut it off. I'm going to take it off myself." I was to that point. I was losing it. And then they
Yeah.
finally said, "Oh yeah, okay, come on in, we'll have." And I got there, and the doctor saw me, and she said, "It's still, it's cold, and it's a little uncolored on the top, but I don't think it's losing blood supply." But they took the bandage off and they changed it, and she was wonderful. She wasn't shaming me for going. I said, I thank you for seeing me. I was freaking out. I couldn't feel my thumb at all. And she said, no, you did the right thing. I'm glad you came in. And then I've navigated the medical system enough for myself and help clients advocate to know that there's like these layers. Usually you have to get past like the reception staff because they're the
Oh,
one
yeah.
barrier. And then if you get a hold of the nurse or whatever, they're another barrier. They don't want it to have to end up at the doctor, right?
Yeah.
And I know that. So, but I had to threaten to be like, I'm just going to get the scissors out and start cutting this thing off. I don't give a put the time down. I don't care what this does. I'm taking it off, and oh, okay, come on in, come on in. But that reminds me, I didn't have that frame for them saying something like, have you sit down, don't move your hand at all, elevate it, and if it's still the same in an hour, let's say they would have, and this was like 2 days before Christmas, so I'm like, I'm going to be screwed if I don't get in before then. I would have had something that would have been that layer out to soothe myself, like if you had that window from your eye person,
Right.
I would have been like, okay, I'm going to sit here for an hour, I'm not going to move at all, I'm going to see what happens. But it's
Yeah.
that we know about sensory stuff, and we know so much about pain control research that if
Yeah.
you don't have the locus of control in your own power, pain escalates and panic and sensory stuff and all that escalates. You have to be able to know you can do something about it, right? Or have
Absolutely.
that cognitive frame for it. Changes everything, right? I've
Yeah.
worn things that I've gotten home and I'm like, a new thing, and I'm like, oh my God, there was actually a tag like in the shoulder and I didn't notice it. How did I not notice it? Because they normally drive me crazy. Clearly, that particular day, I was queuing in on something else and I didn't notice it. Another day, I would have lost my mind. And I
Yeah.
think that's an important point because that judging from other people, like, well, you wore it before and it had a tag on it, you didn't notice it.
Oh,
So what's your problem today? And it is kind of a moving target. And I think that's some of why we do diminish it. Like, oh, I should just, if I think about something else, it'll go away or whatever. And it's just not that simple. Once our brains kind of lock into something, it's not going to go away until you can stop that neural pathway and just have it not fire for a period of time. Right.
I mean, Dana, doesn't it remind you of obsessive thinking?
Totally. Yeah.
It's like, you start to think about it and you just can't like let it go.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes really, really intrusive. And the more you think about it, the more you think about it. And the more you think about it, you're really thinking about it. And then you try not to think about it. It's like too late. Like you hit the threshold and it's all I can think about. And you're like, I need to make this stop. Right. It's, here we go. Dana and I, traveling down the drain, and I think like, this idea of how do we surround ourselves with people who kind of embrace and allow, these things to happen, instead of, shame and judgment and all of this. I mean, there's a reason why we call it bedside manner, in medicine, right? This idea of how do we come to your side? Like, I think about that. But how often, are we kind of surrounded by very quick judgments? We're busy. You need to get it done. I don't want to see you, or whatever. You're being a pain in the butt. You're making, big thing, a mountain out of a molehill. Do we still say that?
Yeah.
A mountain out of a molehill? Okay.
I know.
You and I might still say that. I don't know about the current generation.
No, I think they do. Like I'm getting to the age in my teaching where my students, I think I've used that and they still know it.
They get it.
Yeah.
Okay. We can make a TikTok about it, Dana.
Yeah, it came to mind to me as you were talking about the circling down the drain again, because we've used that analogy a couple times now. In that kind of, this is going to be a very memorable analogy here. So I was thinking of like when you get the urge that you need to use the bathroom, like number 2, right? And you get that kind of twitch in your colon, you can feel it.
Yep.
Okay, so because we started that thinking like, I wasn't circling down the drain, I was thinking a toilet in this case.
Yeah. It's all right. It's another kind of drain.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about like when my wife and I travel. There's a brilliant little scene in the show Friends after Phoebe and Mike get married. And Phoebe comes back from the honeymoon and it's just her. And they're like, where's Mike? And she's like, oh, we were gone for 10 days. He didn't poop the whole time. He's at the doctor. And it's hilarious because everybody can relate to it. And what it reminds me of is like something like that where you get that little, ooh, I think my wife and I say, I feel a rumble. And we know with each other, especially if there's been a problem or like you're traveling, because apparently it's really common when people travel.
To be constipated.
Oh, no, I'm not going to do that.
Oh,
So we know like if either of us says we have that thing, because you can't let go of it. And I'll say, whatever we're doing, we're like, don't worry about it. If you need me to leave the hotel room, I'm just going to sit here and watch TV. You go in there and take as long as you need. It's almost like you need to have the permission to relax. You need to have the permission. And in the case of obsessiveness, you almost need the permission to sit in the obsessiveness and pay it enough attention that you can move on. And it sort of reminds me of that, right? And we do know enough about how neural pathways fire that when you are in that obsessive, it's got your brain that's hijacking you. It's not enough to just say, oh, I'm going to not think about it for like this 10 seconds. You actually have to have a period of time where it's not firing for a while. Because I know the name of it, I teach about this. It's called postsynaptic long-term potentiation. And it's the propensity of the neuron that's receiving the message from the other one to fire again, it's already primed, so it'll fire easier than it did before all the priming happened.
Right, right.
Right. And so you actually have to have a longer period of time where that neural pathway is not getting fired on to stop it, right? And so I had done that with my other thumb when I had surgery, and the splint they put me in, it was a different surgery, was just, I could tell it was the nerves were just like freaking out. And so I got my hand and I propped it between some pillows, and I just tried to hold it and not move it at all for like a half an hour. I just laid in bed with it, so it didn't have to have any pressure, and I was literally not moving it at all, and it stopped the freak out of that
Yeah.
one. It quieted the nerves down enough. And I remember telling the PT person about that. She said, you did exactly what you're supposed to do. You had enough knowledge about quieting down those pathways. So when someone says to you, just chill out, or why can't you let that go, or whatever, you are fighting a very real physiological brain thing that is not as easy as just saying, let it go, right?
Yeah.
And if it's something you can't tune out, like your vision, or you're getting used to, whether it's like you could feel it in there or you can't see, that's not going to stop by willpower at all, right? And then
Yeah.
imagine being younger or being a little kid and trying to do that. Oh my God, there's no way you're going to be able to pull that off.
I mean, it's like an itch too.
Totally.
Like we talk about it, right? Oh, it's really itchy. It's really itchy. And then like, don't itch it. Don't itch it. And
Yeah.
you see like when you cannot itch it, it does go away eventually.
You're hanging from the ceiling at the meantime.
And now I'm all of a sudden really itchy. But this idea of what do you do in that space of discomfort?
Yeah.
How do you take care of yourself in the space of that discomfort? Yeah. We call this in psych, we call this distress tolerance. Maybe meditation people will call it like quieting the monkey brain, or like grounding, or like these types, these are the type of like things that we're talking about. But that what I love that you brought up this postsynaptic potentiation, because it's real.
Yeah.
And we oftentimes talk about that on this show, right? Like it's like it's a real thing.
Yep.
So lean into the realness of it.
Yep.
Instead of diminishing it. I think the fear of that, Dana, and I can hear some naysayers, and I can also hear the fear of some of my clients whenever I say, let's sit with this, let's pay attention to it. It's trying to get our attention for a reason.
Yeah.
So let's give it undivided attention right now together. I'll help you with it, right?
Yeah.
Is if I give into it, quote unquote, I'm gonna be untethered and crazy. Right? Yeah. I'm gonna, right? That's scary to me, because where does that end? And, maybe we're thinking about depressive or anxious thinking that could lead to ideation. I mean, right. We see this happen, how, the worry and the fear of, if I let this go, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then I hear naysayers out there say, you can't just have it your way all the time. Okay. That's not the way the real world works.
So
I mean, can you hear that too?
In other words, you have to suffer. You're not going to fit in the world, and you're just going to have to suffer all the time.
Right.
Is what they're saying.
Right.
It's terrible.
It's really interesting. And so it's like, this is where you guys like make all of your deliberate choices about your environments as much as possible. Who's in them? Where are you? Those are our biggest levers, I think, to pull for well-being. And obviously there are some things that we can't change. And in those places, when we can't change something, we have to see how much it costs us to be around that thing. And if it's a sustainable kind of formula. If, in other words, is it worth it, or is it absolutely necessary in order to do that?
Yeah. And sometimes it's going to be what we call idiopathic too. It's going to be unique to you. And we talk about awareness, we talk about figuring out the whys. And usually when it's an obsessive sort of thing, it's because you haven't figured out the why yet.
The why. Yeah.
And then once you do, it's like, boom, your brain is doing that for a reason. We know that from some of the PTSD research, where it used to be called, you're preoccupied with the trauma and you keep replaying it. And so the goal used to be to have you stop doing that. Now we know to go into it more because your brain is trying to take you there so it can deal with it. And we know this even about combat veterans. If there's a videotape of what happened, now you watch it over and over and over and over until your brain feels like it's satiated, and then you're fine. And we learn so much about obsessive thinking from that research. It's so important, right? So sometimes it'll be unique to you. I'm thinking about the itching thing. If it's something that I've rubbed up against and I can tell it's like an allergic itch, yes, absolutely. Try not to scratch it. I'll get these little creepy crawly itchies on my ankles and my feet sometimes when I go to bed. And if I even touch it the slightest bit to itch it, it escalates it. And I've learned over time what I need to do is run my ankle under the warm water in the sink and scratch it, not to where I'm causing tissue damage, but scratch it enough. And then I use just a towel to rub it really hard, to the point where I sometimes make it bruise underneath, and then the itching stops. And I'm not saying do this. This is an example of the idiopathic thing. I mentioned this to my doctor, and she said, probably what's causing the itching in the first place is you're having some capillaries that are finally relaxing, and you're getting blood flow to your feet, because my feet are always cold. And it's like that creepy crawling. It's making it itch. And what you're doing by warming it up and rubbing it is you're getting a ton of blood there. So it's not the little itching as the capillaries open, you're making them flood open, and then the source of the itch is going away. And I was like, well, that makes sense. So sometimes it can be, try something and see if it works for you. Don't hurt yourself. I don't hurt myself when I do it. But I know now, like if I touch an itch on my ankles at night and it starts to escalate, I just get out of bed immediately and do that, because I know it's not going to stop. Versus if I'm allergic to something, if I leave it alone, it will stop. So it is that self-awareness again, and then also learning for you, what do you need? It's also why we as therapists, we might have an intervention that works really well with one person, that you try it on another person and it doesn't work at all. And we're not all the same, right? You have to figure out what works for that person.
That's actually a really good, like maybe future episode, Dana, which is, are there, and obviously this is idiopathic and this is very dependent person to person, but I will say, if you don't understand the profile of your client, there are some types of interventions that really exacerbate or dysregulate the person unnecessarily. Yeah. And that might be something that, we kind of pick up in general, like just kind of from a more general standpoint,
it's
that,
just not a one
CBT isn't good for every autistic. Inside-oriented therapy isn't good for every autistic. Like, but, you see that a lot in the literature, right? You see CBT. And so, maybe that we can talk about that. Well, I'm here to report that Dana has been able to take my mind off of my still non-working right eye. But, if I just start doing this, Dana,
it's time to advocate for yourself and call the doctor and say, I can't.
Do you know what I did to just contain my craziness in my mind? Is I wrote down on my task list, call the doctor.
See,
because that's enough.
That's the basket you needed that was big enough to bookmark it. That's what another good example of it. Yep.
Yes. Yep. Anyway.
Cool.
All right, you Marvels. Let's see.
You'll never use the toilet again the same and not think.
And I won't, and I'm never going to say I'll see you in the next episode, because I might not.
I hope we do, but maybe not in such an irritated, inflamed manner. Yeah. Oh my God. We have our new episode with Gwen the pirate now, because
I know.
Oh God.
Oh, good grief.
All right. Be good to you, everybody.
But be good to you. Bye.